Alright, so this is different from my regular intros since this is more of an intro into 3 different videos. Essentially what I've done is I've put 3 other videos I've done into one, so you guys get one long video that's more easy to digest, since I don't expect everybody to come back week after week. I know even with the last video I took 2 weeks to go back to the whole video format, so I was like, you know what, when I just upload one long video so you guys can listen to it while you're doing whatever you're doing. If you're at work, put it on. If you want to just chill and eat food while you're watching my videos, that's fine. It's just basically a video that you guys can just chill and relax and watch. But yeah, the format of the video is going to be very simple. I'm going to start off with pre-time skip, then go into post-time skip, then go into the comparison between the two. So that being said, why don't I just leave you guys alone and let you guys get into the video. Wait, hold on, before I get into the video, if you guys like content like this, then say in the comment section so I can put more of my videos together, or I can just make videos that can combine into one long series for you guys so it's easier. I know a lot of people like doing this, so I was like, you know what, why not give it a try? So if you guys like it, then you know what to do. Yeah, like, subscribe, and enjoy the video. Goodbye. Whenever you ask a One Piece fan which one they prefer out of the pre-time skip or post-time skip, they always go for the pre-time skip, and a lot of people do think that's down to nostalgia, but I don't believe so. Whenever we think about pre-time skip, we always think about the adventurous side of it, the side of where we don't know what's going to happen next, but we all know we're going to have a laugh wherever we go. Those things are what made One Piece in the pre-time skip, and a lot of people do believe that post-time skip has lost that flair. So in this video I'm going to be going over the pre-time skip of One Piece to see whether it's carried by its nostalgia or if it's really just that good. But before I get into the video, if you guys enjoy content like this, you know what to do, hit that like button and subscribe. Since I believe it's a win-win, you guys show support and I give it back to you guys in videos. Whether it's One Piece, other anime, or just fiction in general, in due time I'm going to cover it, so be there when I go there. But I feel like that's enough of my rambling, so let's get into the video and truly find out whether One Piece pre-time skip is carried by its nostalgia or if it's just really that good. Now before I get into the video, I will be having rules for this video because I will be ranking each arc and I will be giving you guys my personal opinions on the arc while we're going through the video. So number 1, I will be rating it depending on my enjoyment, the writing, and how obviously it sets up for the future. And then the second rule, if the arc is a part of a saga, so say for instance the boil up to Alabasta, I'm going to include it as one, same as the East Blue. But obviously stuff like Impel Down, I will have it with Amazon Lily. I'm not going to split those up because they're like basically conjoined arcs, so that's what I'm going to do for those ones. But for the big arcs, I will have them by themselves unless they have like little mini arcs conjoined onto them. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So as we all know, One Piece starts off with the East Blue Saga, and it starts off with Luffy and Kobe meeting up. Now these first couple of chapters are pretty good. I wouldn't say they're the best out there, but there's stuff that grips you. I don't think there's anything spectacular here, but there isn't anything bad here, so I'm not going to say too much on it. But with saying that already, I do think there's something that Oda does that I really do like, and it's the little foreshadowing of who Zoro is. He puts it in there and you're like, oh okay, so they're going to look for the Zoro guy, I wonder who it is. And already Oda paints this sort of picture for you in your head about Zoro. You automatically think he's some sort of beast. And so with that being said, we now segue into Zoro's arc, and Zoro's arc is something that keeps you interested as well. I won't say there's anything that's like gripping to me. Like I think it was an okay arc. It keeps you there and it's not gonna make you like turn away and be like, nah, I don't like it. It's still something very good and it keeps you entertained. If you really want to be picky here, there are a few flaws that you can pick out, but I don't believe there are too many. And so with the first arc, it's alright, but then when we segue into Buggy's arc, I do have a few gripes with this arc, I'm not going to lie. When I first watched this and when I do reread it, I do believe that it's kind of slow to me. I don't know why, but I just feel like the arc, it doesn't mesh well with me. Like I just don't like the arc. I do understand that Buggy is a great antagonist later on, but like right here, I just found him very tedious to be around. And I do have the exact same thing with Syrup Village, but the thing with Syrup Village is the fact that I just find that arc horrendous, and I'm going to get into that. Syrup Village really does have every flaw Oda has on paper. Now don't get me wrong, there are a few great things here, but I do believe that there are a lot of things that he did wrong here that in the later arc, and I would even just say an arc after, he cleans it up quickly, and that is something that I love to see about Oda, and he just cleans up all of his stuff and makes sure everything's on point the very next arc, and it shows that he is evolving as a writer. I view Orange Town and the Syrup Village as like training grounds for Oda. I don't see them as any big grandiose arcs. I just see them as training arcs for Oda. That's just how I see them, at least. Yeah, Buggy and Kuro weren't very interesting to me. I know a lot of people do love Buggy, but I didn't find Buggy interesting until Impel Down, and that is something I want to talk about later. But yeah, for the most part, these were the weakest arcs in my opinion. But as if he hit a full 180, Oda drops one of the best arcs in the series in my opinion, and that is Baratie. And everybody knows what happens in Baratie, but I'm still gonna cover it. I believe that Baratie was probably the arc where Oda found what he really wanted to do with One Piece, as when he included Sanji and started getting into Sanji stuff and had Zoro face off against Mihawk and just everything around the arc where then Nami then betrays them, I do believe that this was probably where Oda was like, okay, I know what I want to do with this series, so let's get going. Although I don't find Don Krieg as a gripping villain, I found everybody else in that arc very strong. The side characters were strong, Luffy was strong, everything there, the theme behind the arc and everything, I loved it. I've covered Baratie several times on this channel, but I'm going to go over it briefly here. What I love about Baratie so much is the fact that it emphasizes on chasing your goals, and that is something that I like to see in these type of stories, and it's something that I carry dear to me. Watching Sanji throw away his goals and try to repay a non-existent debt is something that I love, and that is something I always go back to Baratie for. Reading and watching the Zoro fight and watching him promise to Luffy that he'll never lose again is something that I love to see all the time. I know Orange Town does what I'm about to say, but I love the fact that it has a character that comes back later and is now pivotal to the story later. Among all the other great things about Baratie, one of the main things I love about it is Mihawk, and Mihawk is somebody that stands out in that arc, and it's kind of like, okay, if we want to go to that grand line, we need to watch out for people like him. Many shonen do not allow their main characters to lose early on in the story, but this is what I love about One Piece, as it shows us that they're not invincible, and this is a theme that comes back later. Now during all that chaos, the Mary is stolen by Nami, and this is what leads us into Arlong Park, and originally I did not like Nami for this, but as the story goes on I do obviously soften up to her, but at the beginning I didn't. And before I even get into the arc, this is what I love about One Piece, is the fact that it flows. It's not a story where it stops, starts, stop, start, stop, start. No, it flows. And I do know that sometimes in the stories it is kind of like a stop and then start, but here it's very fluent and it feels like it's just a continuous stream. Now Arlong Park, although Baratie did grip me, Arlong Park is where I said I have to catch up to this series, because when I saw all the things that was going on with Nami, and then when they gave us that beautiful scene, and I would say it's probably one of the more iconic scenes in anime now due to One Piece's rise in popularity, I had to just, it's something about this like scene that I was like, yeah, no, I had to catch up. I don't know what it is about Nami saying that she needed help and then Luffy being like, okay, cool, and then he just does this little funny pose. I don't know why nobody ever talks about this pose, but this pose is funny as hell. Like, what is he even doing here? But you have this pose and then you have all the straw hats roll up and you just have them looking cold, and then they roll into Arlong Park and they start scrapping it out. This is what I love about older pre-timeskip, because it's just very fluent and it just feels like, yeah, I can't wait for the showdowns to happen. The enjoyment of this arc was great, the writing was great, and the fact that Arlong isn't just a person that is like, oh, he's just mentioned here and never again. Arlong comes back later and he is very important later, and that is what I love. Whenever I talk about Arlong Park and Baratie, I just feel like they're perfect arcs to start a series off with, as they have everything you want. Rememberable moments, characters that reappear and have a lot of importance in the story later, and the enjoyment factor, well, we know how it is. And so now when we lead into Log Town, I do feel like Log Town was a bit slow, but I didn't mind it. I feel like you can have a slow arc after you just had two phenomenal arcs. And with that being said, I feel like I want to wrap up the East Blue and give it, I don't know, I'd say a 7.5 out of 10. The reason I'm not gonna give it a 9 or something, or even an 8, is because Orange Town exists, Village exists. I do believe that Log Town being a slower arc doesn't affect the score at all. That's what I expect. But the two in between arcs where you've got Orange Town and Syrup Village, they are one of the weaker arcs in One Piece. I'd say they're just the weakest arcs out of One Piece, and yeah, I just don't like them, so I'm gonna have to bump it down to a 7.5. But yeah, the East Blue Saga is a very great way to start your story off of. Another reason I do believe that Log Town does get a pass is because it does reintroduce Buggy, it introduces Smoker, and it introduces Dragon. These three characters are very pivotal to the story today, so yeah, it has to get a pass for that. Now once the Straw Hats enter the Grand Line, they get into the Alabasta Saga. Now I'm going to cover this as one whole saga. That means Drum Island, Little Garden, the Baroque Works Island, and then obviously Alabasta. Now when I talked about fluidity before, this is what I talk about when I talk about fluidity. Everything in this saga is linked to each other. Even though each island may have its own little presence and whatnot, they have to go there for a certain reason or just end up there for a certain reason. Even the characters that are introduced or even just the places that are introduced are very important to this day. Starting off with the Baroque Works Island, even though it's very short, I do believe that everything here was needed and it sets up everything perfectly. With Zoro going around terrorizing the people on the island, with then Vivi revealing herself and then basically saying what she needs help, and then with the introduction of Robin, it really makes this mini arc stand out and it makes it one of the more important arcs of the whole entire saga. And I know there's a bunch of people who's yelling, oh, you missed Laboon and all that. Don't worry, Laboon's in here. I'm just saving Laboon for later when we talk about Thriller Bark. But yeah, if you want to be chronological, yeah, we do start off with Laboon and then we go on to the Baroque Works Island, but I do want to start off with the Baroque Works Island and come back to Laboon later. And so following up on the Baroque Works Island, we do have Little Garden, and I do believe that Little Garden is probably a little bit slower paced, but I do like what happens here. Stuff like Sanji talking to Crocodile, Mr. 3 being there, and Dorian Brogy also basically revealing to us that Elbaf does exist, it expands on the growing story, and that is what I love about this arc. On top of all of that, it does give us one of the more controversial rivalries in the story, so yeah, this arc does everything to build up for the future. And it also gives Usopp something to strive toward. And so when we move on to Drum Island, I believe that it gives us one of the better concepts we've seen in the story. The concept of allowing your will to live on even if your body is dead is something that comes up time and time again in the series, and Wano really does utilize this. Luffy climbing a massive ass mountain for Nami and Sanji, like these things is what I love about the arc as well. The arc also introduces Wapol and Ace, and these two people are very integral to the story today. And so after all of that, we now end up in Alabasta, and Alabasta is probably one of the better arcs in Pre-Timeskip, and I know a lot of people do say that it's like, I know it's very hit or miss, but for me I really love it. If I was to list out everything I love about Alabasta, we'd be here for hours, but I'm just going to sum it up in a few things that I loved the most. I loved Vivi's role in this arc, and I loved how her and Luffy's argument was very important. Another thing I loved so much was how Crocodile did portray to us how corrupt the 7 warlords could truly be. It's really just a precursor of what's going to happen down the line, even if it's in Pre-Timeskip or Post-Timeskip. And so for this whole entire saga, the enjoyment was pretty good. Although there were a few low points, the low points weren't as bad as the East Blue, and the writing here was phenomenal, and the fact that characters do come back time and time again in the future, yeah, this arc was phenomenal. So I'll give the Alabasta Saga an 8.5 out of 10. And so next up is Jaya and Skypiea. Now I know a lot of people do have their gripes with these two arcs, and even I do. I do believe that Jaya was a really good arc, but Skypiea was, in the beginning I do believe it was a bit too slow. The writing of these two arcs were good, don't get me wrong. The writing here was phenomenal, but I just think that the pacing of it was a bit too slow, even in the manga for me. And that's mainly for Skypiea. Now don't get me wrong, as I just said, the writing for it was great, and the lore that we learned here was phenomenal. It just expands everything we know about One Piece. From them discovering that floating ship in the sky dropped into the sea, to them meeting Nolan's descendants, and just everything on Skypiea itself, the lore here was heavy and it was great. Everything here could be used in the future, and the fact that we found out there's more Skypiea islands, it just makes everything here feel more rewarding. And in my opinion, the way Luffy beats Enel was the best finisher in the series. I don't know why, I just feel like him ringing the bell, him jumping in the sky, then below seeing it, that was just beautiful. So I'm gonna wrap everything up now. The enjoyment was pretty good. I do feel like it's spoiled a bit by the slow pacing. I know this is something that everybody complains about with the arc, but once you can get past the pacing, it's not really too bad. The writing was great here, and with them reappearing later, I know it's in a ongoing cover story. I know it stops for a bit, but I do think he's gonna come back later. But with that being said, I don't know, I'd rate it like a 7.8, 8. I think it's better than the East Blue, mainly because of the lore and everything we got here, and the moments are, I don't know, I'd say the East Blue at its peak was better, but I feel like this is just better consistently, so I'll give it a 7.8 to an 8. Yeah, I think that's a fair rating. And so moving on, I'm talking about an arc I've never talked about before, and that is Long Ring Longland. Now this is probably going to be the shortest section of the video, as I do not like this arc at all. I think I like it a little bit better than Syrup Village and the other one, Orange Town. But nah, I'm sorry, this arc, I know people are gonna sue me for this because there are Sanji and Zoro moments, and there's like, I don't know, cool boxing, but I don't know, man, I just don't like it. I don't think there's anything reoccurring that happens here. I could be wrong and people could be slewing me in the comment section, but nah, I think that this arc is a solid 4. it's definitely like, if you want to hold it by itself, aside from Secret Village and Orange Town, it's definitely the weakest the arcs I'm gonna cover here. But yeah, I'm just gonna move on from this because like I don't really like it. So moving on to better news, let's move on to Water 7 and Annie's Lobby. Now Water 7 and Annie's Lobby may be the peak of the series to many people, and if they say that, I can't really bash them, as I do believe so as well. There's only one more stretch that can even match this, and it's Sabaody into Amazon Lily into Impel Down into Marineford. And to be honest, you could just say from Water 7 up to Marineford, it's just one long stretch that is untouched, and I do believe that this one long stretch is probably the best stretch we've seen in manga period. But before I get ahead of myself, let's just focus on Water 7 and Annie's Lobby. Now Water 7 into Annie's Lobby is very good as they flow into each other, and everything you learn in Water 7 is then applied into Annie's Lobby. Even with how the Straw Hats interact with Robin and everything, I just think that this arc, or these two arcs, are phenomenal. The pacing in my eyes never really felt slow. The conflicts between them and Usopp was great. The way how Usopp came back and tried to act like he was somebody else was funny as well. The massive twist of Lucci and them being on the world government side and them being CP9 agents was great as well. The Straw Hats on the train was great. Sanji's little escapade throughout the whole train was great. Just everything overall, with Robin saying she wants to live. You have so many iconic moments during this arc, and it's something that you can't top. Oda was truly in his bag when he was creating Water 7 and Annie's Lobby, and the enjoyment throughout all of it was great. It was just everything from top to bottom is a 10 out of 10. Like that is just all I need to say. Everything is a 10 out of 10. Everything that's shown and introduced here does come back later, even the main characters. Aokiji gives us a hint to what the admirals are truly like. We found out more about Luffy's family. The Ohara incident still makes waves to this day. Like the Ohara incident is still relevant to this day. Everything that is shown here is extremely crucial to the story, and this is why this arc is just one of the best out there. And so following up on those amazing arcs, we have Thriller Bark, and in my opinion, I do believe that Thriller Bark is one of the more overhated arcs in the entire series. In my eyes, I view Thriller Bark as a cooldown arc, and it does it perfectly. Although a lot of things you could say like the pacing was a tiny bit bad, I do believe that all the writing here and everything that went on was great. I think what I love most about the arc is the fight against Oars and then what happens after it with Kuma showing up and whatnot, but I think everybody else thinks that the arc is terrible aside from like the Zoro moment, which I do believe is false. I think a lot of people hate on the arc mainly because it happens right after Water 7 and Annie's Lobby, and so it's like when you go from a clear 10 out of 10 down to like a 7 or an 8 out of 10, you're like, I don't know if I really like it. But trust me, Thriller Bark, if you read Thriller Bark today just with a clear mind, you will like it. Although I do have gripes with it, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's the best arc in One Piece, I'm saying it's the most overhated arc in One Piece. But yeah, I give Thriller Bark a 7.5 out of 10. I mean, it's good, like don't get me wrong, it's a fun read. I think the one thing Thriller Bark does is it's fun, and I know Moria isn't the best villain, and he does come back later and he is important later, and obviously you have Perona and whatnot, she's important later, but I think it's a relatively fun arc. I don't take the arc too seriously like a lot of people do, and I just think that it's just like a breather arc, and it's a good breather arc because it does introduce people like Brook, and Brook is a good Straw Hat. We have Brook's backstory, we also get stuff about Ryuma, we have stuff about Laboon, like stuff that gets introduced in this arc is very good, but I feel like a lot of people overlook it because of Annie's Lobby and Water 7, and I'd even say the arc that comes after it, Sabaody, Impel Down, and then Marineford. So since we're here, let's talk about Sabaody. One thing I love about Sabaody is that it gives us the harsh realities of the One Piece world. From having these bubbly quests that, yeah, okay, there were a bit darker times, but mostly they're bubbly, you then go to Sabaody where there's slave trade here, and then you just have Luffy straight up losing. This is something that leaves a mark on the reader and Luffy himself, and it's kind of like, wow, what just happened? We're also introduced to other rookies, and there's a rookie out there that was doing more than Luffy, and that was Kid. We get to meet the right-hand man of the previous Pirate King. Like, a lot of things are shown here that I love. Overall, I'd say the arc is a 9.5 to 10 out of 10. Like, the arc is one of the best arcs in One Piece, and it doesn't really ever get slandered, and that's because it's great. It's one of the greater arcs in the whole entire series. Like, there's so many things I could delve into here, but as I said before, if I was to talk on it, we'd be here for hours. And so with that being said, let's segue into the last saga of the Pre-Timeskip, and that is the Marineford saga. The Marineford saga had Amazon Lily, Impel Down, and Marineford. Now, Amazon Lily was okay. Like, I know there's a few things that we like obviously it shows us that Ace has been captured and whatnot, and I actually forgot about all the things that happen in between, like in Thriller Bark and Water 7 and Annie's Lobby, where we see Shanks meet up with Whitebeard, we see Blackbeard versus Ace, and we have a few other things that happen in the background. Now, I could go over them, but if I did, I'll be here for hours, but I'm going to include them here since they are very pivotal here. And so I feel like Amazon Lily was like just a world building arc, and it just gives us more people to meet like Boa and whatnot. And then obviously it then segues into Impel Down because Ace has been captured by Blackbeard, and obviously he gave him to the world government, and the world government are like, cool, let's execute this guy. And so when we get into Impel Down, right, I feel like Impel Down is just one of the best arcs in One Piece. Now, I've said that a few times in this video, but I truly mean that when I say that. I believe Impel Down is the most underrated arc in the entire series, like, and that is just me being firm. Like, I don't believe there's a single arc that's more underrated than it. The characters it brings back, the emotions that it has, everything in this arc was perfect, and I just feel like there wasn't a better arc to bridge between Amazon Lily and Marineford, and it kind of just builds you up from Marineford. And so then when you get to Marineford, you get all these crazy battles, you get all these crazy reveals like Roger being Ace's father and everything, and you have so many moving parts here. And then I feel like the whole saga of like Sabaody all the way up until Marineford, it's really to show Luffy how dark the One Piece world is, and just how he is just one person within it. Like, everything is not gonna go his way, because obviously with the death of Ace, you then are like, wow, it really just set you back to like ground zero, and you're like, wow, okay, cool, wow, so like that just happened. And this is where Luffy needs to ground himself in reality and realize that there are people out there that are bigger and stronger than you. You can't just gum smash your way through everything that happens. You need to get yourself right before you enter that new world. And there were even more themes explored in Marineford, and we have Akainu and everything, we have all of his bad deeds and everything. Like, there were just so many things here. We get to see Garp, and this is where Garp takes that first step into be one of the greater written characters in the story. Just everything in Marineford, Impel Down, Amazon Lily, and even Sabaody was just great. And with that being said, I'm going to top off the Amazon Lily, Impel Down, and Marineford saga with a good 10 out of 10. It was a 10 out of 10 saga, let's not lie. And as I said over and over again, if I were to delve into every theme covered in these like just 3 arcs, I'd be here for hours, but obviously this isn't the video for that. And so I really want to just end the video by recapping everything and just going over why a Pre-Timeskip is not carried by nostalgia. The world building, the writing, the moments, just everything that happens in Pre-Timeskip is just phenomenal. And I feel like Oda was in his rhythm when he got up to Marineford, and many may say that he did drop off when he got to Fisherman Island and whatnot, but I feel like when he got there he started to focus more on lore, and it was like the pacing slowed down, everything slowed down. But that is not where I want to, like, in this video I don't want to discuss that. I want to keep on track with Pre-Timeskip, and yeah, everything with Pre-Timeskip, as you heard from me in this video, it has its lows, but when Oda gets going, he gets going, and there's no stopping him. There has been one hiccup in the road, and that's Long Ring Longland, but nobody even really talks about that. It's just like a little stumbling block. That's like literally a cooldown arc after Skypiea. But aside from that, everything in Pre-Timeskip after the, I'll say even after Syrup Village, was top tier. Like, you could watch it and or read it and be enjoyed. Like, everything about it is fine. And so yeah, Pre-Timeskip is just that good. Like, it's not carried by nostalgia in my eyes. I do believe that nostalgia does boost up a few points, but with what One Piece is trying to achieve, adventure, comedy, fights and whatnot, Pre-Timeskip does it all, and it does it to a T. And how I personally feel about Post-Timeskip, whoa, recently I made a video covering whether Pre-Timeskip was carried by nostalgia or if it was really that good. And if you want to find the answer to that, I'm going to put it up in the cards so you guys can go watch that video and find out what my opinions are on it. But as I said at the end of the video, I will be covering Post-Timeskip, and that's what we are here for today. So strap in, because I want to get real in depth with this one, just like I got real in depth with the Pre-Timeskip one. But before I start the video, if you guys like this type of content, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button and subscribe, as I do post content like this regularly, and to be honest, it is a win-win. You guys show support and I'll give it back to you guys in videos. Whether it's One Piece, other anime, or just fiction in general, in due time I'm going to cover it, so be there when I go there. But I feel like that's enough of my rambling. Why don't I get into the video and truly find out whether Pre-Timeskip is overhated or overrated. So just like last time, I'm going to start with the rules, and the rules are pretty simple. How I rank these arcs would be very simple. It will be on how I enjoy it, the writing, and if the arc has a lasting effect upon the series. The second rule is if there's like a saga going on, like the same way I did the Marineford saga, I'm going to put that as 1, but obviously I don't think there are too many ones in Post-Timeskip, as a lot of the arcs are just very like bang bang bang. I know it's part of the Yonko saga, but they're not really like an ongoing arc, if that makes sense. But with that being said, I think the rules are done, so let's get into the video and start off with Fishman Island. Now, I know you heard me say Fishman Island when Return to Sabaody is right there, but as I said before, I'm going to conjoin it onto one arc so it makes it a lot more simple and easier for me to do. Return to Sabaody was okay. Like, there's nothing for me to say, oh yes, it was great, but there's nothing for me to say, oh yes, it was terrible. Like, it was just an arc. Like, it's a mid arc. Not in a rude way, but it's just a mid arc. There isn't anything for me to poke holes at. There isn't anything for me to say, oh yes, the greatest. I do like the interaction with the Straw Hats though. I like when Zoro got lost and obviously of Zoro and Sanji arguing straight away. Like, they just met again in that argument. Yeah, overall was what it was meant to be, just a short arc just to push us into Fishman Island. And so now I'm going to segue into Fishman Island. Now, Fishman Island is an arc that everybody looks upon and has different opinions on it because they either love it or they hate it. I think there are a lot less people that love it because we will think of the arc for very few things, and the few things aren't good. But before I get into the negatives, I want to get into the positives. Learning about the Sun Pirates is probably the best thing about this arc, and just Queen Otohime. Like, those two things is what carries Fishman Island. Is we get a lot of lore, and we get just a lot of deep characters, and we get to see how fishermen face oppression in the One Piece verse, but then we get to see how it then affects the people that haven't done anything. These are all great things that Fishman Island does well. Like, don't get me wrong, it's older, he's gonna do character stories perfectly, but everything else about the arc, it just doesn't mesh well with me. Now, my first watch through, I thought the arc was very slow and boring, and then when I read it, I didn't feel any different. I thought it was slow, but I think because it's the manga, it just went a little bit faster. But there wasn't anything like too great about the pacing. Hody wasn't a gripping villain in my opinion. Like, you could have given that role to somebody else and they would have been more gripping, or you could just add more onto Hody and I would have been more involved. But I don't know, I think in my opinion it was the strength of Hody. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, but it's not enough now. Okay, listen, the strength of a villain does give you more like of a reason to be involved, and he wasn't anything impressive, so I didn't really see him as a gripping villain. I expect them to be strong, I expect them to have that writing to back it up, but he didn't have that. His lackeys were kind of mid. Like, there wasn't anything for me to say, oh yeah, no, it was an outstanding arc. Like, the arc overall, in my opinion, as I just said about Return to Sabaody, was mid, and because of the low points in the arc, and like, okay, I know I'm a Sanji fan, so this is going to sound kind of salty, but I feel like the overusage of the gag, annoying and overused, and that's something that everybody can agree upon, even if you're a Sanji fan or not. Yeah, the gag was very overused, and just, I don't know, it just soured the arc for me because there's a lot of things the arc does. It's just very slow paced, but the writing was good. Don't get me wrong, the writing of Fishman Island was phenomenal, but everything else just wasn't up to par. I will say that the lasting effects of the arc does carry throughout the story, but I mean, that's really about it. The enjoyment factor of this arc was not there, and so because of that, I'm going to give Return to Sabaody and Fishman Island a 5.5 out of 10. Moving on from those two arcs, why don't we go into Punk Hazard? Now, Punk Hazard did include less things overall. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, the substance that we got in Fishman Island was way better than we got in Punk Hazard, but I feel like the character interactions in Punk Hazard and the reveals that we get here is a little bit better. But with that being said, the overall writing just doesn't feel as potent as it did in Fishman Island or even the arcs after. It just felt like a filler arc in my opinion. But then again, the characters that get added to the cast and what we find out on this arc is it's good. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, like, Fishman Island and Punk Hazard, I know a lot of people rate it low, but these two arcs are very weird because they introduce a lot of good things, but they don't really do a lot. Like, the enjoyment factor isn't there, but the writing aspect, or I should just say what they introduce in general, is pretty good. We get the introduction of Momonosuke and Kinemon, we get Law's return, we get Virgo, we get Doflamingo, we get Smoker's return. There are so many people that appear here, but it's like, when you look at the overall enjoyment of the arc, it's just not there. But one thing this arc does do is it sets up for the future really well. But I mean, look, listen, when the enjoyment factor is really low, the writing isn't the best, but you're setting up for the future really well. I mean, look, listen, in my opinion, this arc has to be like a 4 out of 10. I'm sorry, the arc did do a little bit, but it didn't do a lot. Like, nobody wants to go back and actively read Punk Hazard again. I don't know a single person that wants to do that. I mean, look, Caesar's a decent antagonist, if you want to say that. Kuzan's appearance at the end of the arc was pretty good. Like, there are a lot of things that it does do, but it just doesn't, I don't know, it's a weird arc. It doesn't feel like it grants anything higher than, I'd even say a 6 out of 10. The arc isn't that good, but it just brings in a lot of things that you're like, okay, I can see the story progressing forward. But aside from that, I mean, look, it's just it's a nothing arc. Like, I can just look at him and be like, it's a nothing arc. So moving on, we're going to go to Dressrosa. And behind Thriller Bark, I do believe that this is the most overhated arc in the entire series. I'm going to say this now, the arc is only hated because of the anime and because a lot of people did catch up to this weekly, so they hate it because they was having to sit through it. If that wasn't the case, this arc would be praised up and down. The arc does everything you want to do and more. I do agree there were a few slow moments, but aside from that, the arc was phenomenal, and I'm going to get into why it is good. We get Sabo's return, and I know a lot of people feel like he's just a shoo-in just so we can get another Ace, but I do like Sabo's character a little bit. He's different from Ace and he's different from Luffy. He's got his own little like thing that he does. Like, he isn't as brash as them. He's more calculated in my eyes, and like, I just like him like as a character. I don't like him more than Ace though. I like Ace way more, but he's somebody that's just like, okay, cool, you can get him on the team and he's pretty good, and he does bring in the Revolutionary Army a little bit more. We get Fujitora's introduction, and Fujitora is one of my favorite characters in the entire series. Like, I love Fujitora so much because he just gives that new flair to the Marines. We then learn about the underworld and how like basically everybody corrupt is tied to it. We see the sad factories that impacts Wano as well. Like, a lot of things that are shown here are great, and everybody's favorite part of this arc is Law's backstory, and Law's backstory is something I want to delve into. Now, although Law's character in his backstory was pretty good, I love Corazon, and I think that's why everybody loves his backstory. Corazon is somebody that everybody loves in this series because he understands how corrupt the One Piece world is. From looking at Law to then looking at his brother and just everything around him, he's like, wow. His whole journey with Law, him getting mad at people saying that they can't help him and whatnot, and like him being a celestial dragon like in the first place, and then seeing everything that goes on. Doflamingo's backstory as well, because it, in my opinion, is kind of like just tied into each other. I feel like because once you start off with Doflamingo's, then it goes into Law's, you then get to see Doflamingo's backstory previously and get to see how he was treated, and then you can see how a lot of people do have the debate on whether Doflamingo was born evil or if he was just turned evil. But in my opinion, you look at Corazon and then you look at him and you're just able to make that judgment yourself. This arc does so many things well. It makes the antagonist gripping because we get to see his backstory, we get to see why he is the way he is today, and on top of that we get all these other things as well. We see why Law is the way he is today. Like, so many things are shown here and it's just great, and the finale of the arc was great as well. I also love the fact that Fujitora's character gets shown here as well. We get to see why he's blind, and we get to see him argue with Sakazuki. We get to see him apologize for what the Marines and the world government have been doing, and just his whole sense of justice. It just brings his arc full circle, and everything about the arc with Doflamingo taking over Dressrosa and whatnot, a lot of people like to compare it to Alabasta, and I feel like because of Doflamingo's backstory, I do think this is better than Alabasta. That is the main reason I think it's better than Alabasta. Alabasta did a lot of things great, but with this, it has Doflamingo's backstory, you have Law's backstory, you have all these different things just tying into one. We have the underworld, we have so many different things here, and it's like, I don't know, like I don't know how people can hate on this arc. I think, as I said before, it's mainly because the anime is pacing, but aside from that, I mean, look, listen, if you read the manga and you read it with a clear head, the arc is good. Like, there's nothing bad with it. So personally, I would rate the arc a 9 out of 10. There isn't anything bad about the arc aside from the pacing and the anime, and that's what I'm gonna bump it down a little bit for. But aside from that, it does everything really well. Now we move into Zou, and I know I didn't cover before that the groups did split up, but yes, the groups did split up. I'm going to cover Luffy's perspective and then move into Nami and Sanji's perspective, since I feel like if you learn it that way then it's just better. So the group leave Dressrosa and they end up on Zou, and when they end up on Zou, they obviously run into Nami and the others, and that's when the news breaks that Sanji has left. Now in my previous video I talked about fluidity, and one thing I will say is that the Yonko saga was very fluid. Every arc just flowed into the next. It wasn't really like a stop and start. You can say that this into Whole Cake Island was a stop and start, but I don't believe so because of this setup. In this arc we meet people like Pedro, Carrot, Nekomamushi, we meet a lot of people, and we also meet the rest of the Scabbards aside from the ones that are on Wano, of course. And so when we meet these people, it's like, yeah, it's pretty good, and the arc doesn't really do anything wrong. A lot of these arcs don't really do much wrong. It's just the fact that sometimes their pacing maybe feels slow, or maybe the enjoyment factor wasn't there. But the pacing here was fine. The enjoyment factor was okay. Like, there wasn't really much. Like, there's nothing great about the arc, but there's nothing bad about it. So yeah, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. We did get to learn about Oden here, and we did get to learn about obviously the poneglyphs and everything else. So yeah, the arc was a 7 out of 10. There's nothing too great about it, but it did introduce a lot of good things. Now, following up, we have Whole Cake Island, and this is one of my favorite arcs in the entire series. The whole theme behind the arc, where it goes on to child abuse and it focuses on like personal issues like self-esteem and whatnot because of that, and just all the things that come from bad parenting. And just the arc is one of my favorite sort of like themes and things that it dives into. Katakuri, Pudding, and Sanji being the main focuses of this arc in my eyes. Like, these three show what bad parenting or just like terrible childhoods can bring. But the mission of Whole Cake Island was pretty simple. It's just to rescue Sanji, but when they actually find Sanji, Sanji doesn't want to go back, and that is because he is reunited with his traumatic past. Watching Sanji trying to fight his past battles, it's really touching, because as you guys know, Sanji's one of my favorite characters, and up until that point he was my favorite character. So when I saw that, it touched me deeply. And when I got on to the rest of the arc and everything, and when he had that conflict with Luffy, and then you find out Pudding was going to betray him, so many things happened in this arc. Like, we then get Katakuri's backstory with Burley, we get to see how Burley and Katakuri interact, we then see how Katakuri loves to, or just wants everybody to see him as perfect because he can't have any weaknesses. All these different things, it's just so great. And obviously at the center of it, you then have Luffy and Sanji, since obviously Sanji talks to Pudding and he's like, "No, I think your eye's beautiful," and that's the first time anybody's ever said that to Pudding, and Pudding snaps out of all the things that was happening to her. But she obviously has that little like where she goes in between the different modes, where she's loving Sanji, then she hates him, and then the kiss at the end. Everything about this arc was just phenomenal. There's so many more themes I can go into, like Big Mom. Big Mom's terrible parenting does come from her childhood as well. Like, it isn't a thing where she's just naturally evil. She was a girl that wanted to be loved and loved all these different things, but as we saw, things just didn't pan out that way. One, because, well, there's a lot of dark things that I hear. Like, she's in literally a child trafficking thing where they wanted to put her into the Marines and then make her a fleet admiral, an admiral, or just like sell her to somebody. Like, that is some dark stuff that was going on. The way how Oda paints Whole Cake Island as this colorful place where it's all pink and nice and everything, but then when you look at all the undertones under it, you're like, wow, the arc is really dark. That is one thing that he plays on so well, and that is something that I feel like a lot of people just miss with Whole Cake Island. Whole Cake Island is a facade. Everything about that island is dark, but we don't think that because of the whole infrastructure and how it just looks really nice. Whole Cake Island is definitely one of the best arcs in One Piece. So with that being said, I'm gonna make it a 10 out of 10, especially with the fight at the end with Katakuri. And I know a lot of people that I'm just gonna say it, a lot of boneheads will say that the fight with Katakuri is what carried the arc, but no, absolutely not. Everything else about the arc in terms of writing, I know a lot of people do feel a certain way about it, because I've heard a lot of things about the wedding cake and how they didn't like how the wedding cake was dragged on in the manga for so long and then the anime. But in my opinion, when you go back, and what a lot of people need to do is they need to go back and read One Piece, and I'm gonna say this at the end, but I'm just gonna touch on it a little bit here. One Piece arcs are way better, like you experience them way better when you just read them as a whole, like package. You can't read a One Piece arc week to week and expect to have a good rating. You need to go back and read it, and Whole Cake Island is definitely an arc you need to go back and reread. So I'm guessing everybody wants me to move into the Reverie next, but no. Let's move into Wano, and then I'm going to go over the Reverie with Egghead, since the Reverie is basically just all like laid out in Egghead, so I might as well just make it one long part in Egghead. Now I'm actually going to start this one off with Wano's rating, so I can then explain why I've rated it this number. I think Wano is a 7.5 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, and I have my reasons for it. I know a lot of people are going to either be like, that's too high or that is too low, and I'm going to explain why I have it right here. The amount of times I've reread Wano in the past 2 years, I think it's been countless times now. I've reread the arc so many times because every single time I read it, I get a different outcome, and I'm like, okay, cool. And I read it for obviously different reasons. Sometimes for power scaling, sometimes it's just for the story itself. In the beginning, we're introduced to Tama, and we find out Tama does know Ace, and so that is pretty cool. And then Luffy loses to Kaido, and in my eyes, I think this was the foreshadowing that Wano was going to be long, but in my opinion, I don't think it was long enough, and I'm going to get into that in a bit. But yeah, this was just the best way to tell your fans like, look, listen, this is going to be a long arc, so get prepared. Now this is where we enter the middle section of the story, and I think this is where the ratings drop for me. A lot of things happen here that is like, okay, cool, we get to see Zora's little adventure, we get to see other things, but for the most part I only look at it for the udon part. And obviously we have Big Mom coming onto the island. I don't like what they did with Big Mom. Like, Big Mom being a joke character is something that really aggravated me, because they gave us such a captivating story in Whole Cake Island just to make her a joke. I feel like the community, if the community went back and read Big Mom's backstory and then read Wano, they would feel infuriated, and that is how I feel. Big Mom is one of the better characters in the series in my eyes. I feel like her backstory was phenomenal, but they just squandered her. Obviously inside Udon we have Kid and whatnot. Just the whole story was okay, like everything was just flowing as usual. And then obviously when they break out of Udon, they defeat whatever. Luffy has that speech to Momo. Momo obviously does what he needs to say, and then we move into the Oden flashback. Now the Oden flashback is what really bumps us up a few tiers, and out of the flashbacks we've had in the story, this is probably the best one aside from the Kuma one and Sanji. Like that, like this lore, Sanji and Kuma's is up there. Like they're definitely like the big four that battle it out all the time. I think Robin's one is pretty good as well, and obviously a Brooks one, but those four, in my opinion, I think Sanji's one is more just personal bias because, you know, Sanji's my favorite character. But if you want to include Robin's one, you be at the top 5. The enjoyment factor here, the writing here, and what it does for the story later, like the lasting effects for it, this flashback is phenomenal. It does all of it, and that is why I have no gripes with it. It's a 10 out of 10 flashback in my eyes. But then when we go back to the Onigashima raid, this is where I feel like conflicting things happen for me. Characters that did benefit from this raid was Sanji, Kaido, Luffy, and Momo. Yamato as well, but obviously I'm not going to get into Yamato just yet. I think Kinemon did get a boost here as well, but I do feel like if he did die in the raid, it would have been a lot more impactful for Momo, and it would have done his character justice. I think him coming back at the end is very like, I would rather he died. Like, I would rather him die and Izo live. I don't even like Izo like that, but I'd just rather like he die and Izo lives, and that would be a fair trade in my eyes. But yeah, a lot of people did benefit from this arc, and in my last video I did talk about how the will of people living on even when they're dead is very pivotal in this arc, and this is what this arc does really, really well. Obviously we have Oden's will living on, but everything about this arc, it's like very like one thing's good, one thing's bad, one thing is good, one thing's bad. Like there's a lot of things that happen in this arc. And so I really want to talk about Kaido. Kaido is somebody that, I'm not gonna lie, I had a video in reserves for Kaido, but I feel like I just want to cover a little bit of it here. Now understand, when I say antagonist and villain, I view them as two different things. Like, I see villain as more Doflamingo, while antagonist is more Kaido. I know a lot of people are going to struggle to understand that, but that's how I view the two things. I view them as two separate things. And so as a villain, I do believe that Doflamingo and Crocodile are better, but as an antagonist towards Luffy himself, I do believe that Kaido is the best so far in the series. I don't know if Emu or Blackbeard could top him, but right now Kaido is the best, and I think it's just because of his whole ideology and how he views piracy and how he just views legacy as a whole. He believes that death is the be all and end all, and he believes that yes, once you die and you get that great hoo-ha at the end, that is when you are known as a legend or whatnot. But then when we see how he went out, that it's really telling, and it's like Oda wanted to show him that, nah man, you're not getting that death you wanted. That's what Luffy gave him. He didn't give him the death that he wanted. Yes, he was beat by Joy Boy in quotation marks, but he wasn't beaten in that grandiose way that he wanted to be beat. He wasn't beat in front of everybody. He was just, oh yeah, by the way, Kaido lost. Oh, okay, cool. It wasn't like a thing where everybody saw it, like how Whitebeard was shown on TV and that's when he died and everybody was crowning him whatever. Like, it was just a death where it was just like, okay, you're off to the side, that is your story, it's done. And that is so great, and I feel like a lot of people do miss that because they're trying to be like, oh, it's meant to be grand, or oh, he should have had more. And I do agree with you that Kaido should have a better backstory, but in the exact same breath, Kaido is woven into every single major event we've had in the series so far, and somewhere or another he's woven into it. And I feel like that backstory, we're gonna get it as time progresses. God Valley is a major one. We're gonna see why Kaido is the way he is today because of God Valley. Obviously we learn about King's race and Lunarians. I do believe that King was a very bland character. For what he could have been, King could have been a way better character. I believe overall King was just like, his whole stick is just being a Lunarian. That is why I see King as. King could have been way better. Queen wasn't okay. He was actually funny. I do find Queen funny, and I do think that he's an okay antagonist for Sanji. I think he was just everything that Sanji didn't want to be, so he was like, yeah, let me get you out of the way. And then yeah, just everybody else on the island was okay. Like there wasn't too many standout moments from everybody else, like in terms of Ryan. I think Sanji did have the best one aside from like Momo and whatnot, but yeah, the arc overall was okay. Like that's why it's a 7.5 out of 10. Like there's a lot of things that it does well, but a lot of things it does bad. And the length of it, this is something I want to have like a conversation about. I think the length of Wano should have gone on, like there should have been more. I don't know, like I know before I did have a lot of things that I wanted to go on for longer, but I've like lost it now. But I do believe that it should have gone on for a little bit longer in my eyes. I was thinking that Oden was a perfect character introduced here. Like there was a lot of things that Wano did well, but at the exact same time it did really bad. Another gripe I do have with Wano is Yamato. Yamato in my eyes could have been a way better character. I know a lot of people are gonna say, oh, but her backstory was great. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, what does she really even do? Like, I'm sorry, please remind me what she does again. And so yeah, there are a lot of other things that I could delve into, but obviously, as you know, if I did, I'll be here for hours. So yeah, Wano was a 7.5 out of 10. And like that, the rating is pretty fair in my eyes. And so moving on, we have Egghead, and Egghead has a bunch of things that I could go over, and if I did, as I always say, I'll be here for hours. But to keep it short and sweet, Egghead's writing, its overall enjoyment, and just how it wove into the story later, and just everything that happened here was great. It was phenomenal. There isn't anything bad about the arc. Like I know a lot of people just say, oh, this, that, and the third. Listen, go back and read this arc as a full package. As I've said multiple times now, read One Piece as a full package and you won't be disappointed. You guys like reading it weekly, so then what will happen is that it will be squandered for you. Even at some point I thought Egghead was like a 7 out of 10. I'm sorry to tell you, but it's a 9 out of 10. From Kizaru to the outside world and everything, to even the Reverie, which I'm gonna cover now, like everything else, bro, everything inside of Egghead and even outside was phenomenal. I can say that reading it weekly will taint a lot of people's eyes on how they view the arc, but I'm telling you, read it as like a full package and you will not be disappointed, not one bit. And lastly, let's talk about the Reverie. And I know the Reverie is scattered throughout like Egghead and Wano, but overall the Reverie is pretty good. Like there isn't anything bad about the Reverie. We get some really good lore drops and everything. It was just a good arc. The enjoyment was good since it was short and snappy. Yeah, I'll say Reverie is like an 8.5 out of 10. But yeah, there are so many things that the Reverie and Egghead did, like Kuma's flashback and everything. Like there are so many things that I could cover, but as I said before, if I were to do it, we'll be here for hours. So to recap, is the One Piece post-Timeskip overrated or is it overhated? I do believe that it's overhated, but it's definitely not underrated. I believe that people do have a sort of fair judgment of it, but I do believe that it is squandered because a lot of people do read it weekly and watch it weekly, so they're having to put up with the nonsense that the community portrays and then just what the anime portrays as a whole. And this is coming from someone that's heavily involved in the community, so I can just see that they're baboons. Like the majority of them are baboons. Like let's not sit here and rely, like the way how they react to every single week and how they do all this stuff, like a lot of things can shape how you view a series because of the community, and a lot of people think that shouldn't happen, but that's just how things are. If you connect one thing with another thing, you're automatically going to think of that one thing because of that other thing. And so if the community is bad and is toxic, and so you're going to view it as bad and toxic, and that is how a lot of things have gone, and that is how Wano was rated, and especially Egghead, because why Egghead was being rated a 6 out of 10 we do not know. Recently on the channel, I've gone back to read both Pre-Timeskip and Post-Timeskip to give them an overall fair rating. And at the end of my Post-Timeskip video, I hinted towards me putting them up against each other to see which one is better. And today, that is what we are here for. In today's video, I'm going to be comparing both Pre-Timeskip and Post-Timeskip to see which one is better. But before I get into the video, if you guys like content like this, you know what to do. Hit the like button and subscribe, as I do post content like this regularly, and in my opinion, it's a win-win. You guys show support and I'll push out more videos like this in the near future. Whether it's One Piece, other anime, or just fiction in general, in due time I plan on covering it, so be there when I go there. But I feel like that's enough of my rambling. Why don't I get into the video and find out which part of this series was better, Pre-Timeskip or Post-Timeskip? Now before I get into the video, I'm going to set out the rules so you guys know what I'm ranking this by. The first rule is I'll be comparing arcs of similar sizes, so just because, I don't know, Zou happens whenever Thriller Bark happened, I'm not going to have those two go up against each other because the longevity of each arc is a little bit different. This only happened like once in the video, so it's nothing too drastic. The second rule will be me ranking every arc in the exact same way I ranked them in my other videos. So the way how I had the Marineford saga as one whole saga, I'm going to keep it that exact same way in this video. So if you don't really understand what I'm talking about, especially go back and watch the other previous videos so you get a better grip and an understanding of what I'm talking about. And the third rule will be me looking at this more objectively. So I'll be covering everything the arcs do right and wrong in terms of writing and enjoyment. I don't expect everybody to agree with me, but I think a lot of people will get my gist on what I'm trying to say. So that being said, why don't I get into the video and see which one was better, pre-timeskip or post-timeskip. First up on the list we have the East Blue Saga versus Return to Sabaody. Now I want to start this off with the negatives of these arcs and then go on to the positives. The negatives of the East Blue Saga mainly comes from Oda still learning how to hone his pen, and Syrup Village has this on full display. Kuro doesn't feel like a proper antagonist, his motivations were okay, but he doesn't feel as impactful as the villains that come after him, and his lackeys, well, they were even worse. Out of all of his lackeys, the best one by far in my eyes was the Django, because the rest felt really lackluster and they weren't anything too spectacular. And in my opinion, the exact same thing can be said about Orange Town. It didn't really move me, and I found Buggy as a very lacking villain at the time, and he felt more of a nuisance than an actual threat. The very last negative I have about the East Blue Saga, which only pertains to Orange Town and Syrup Village, was the feeling of nothing happening when things were happening. This complaint is definitely more aimed towards the anime, but in the manga I did feel it a tiny bit as well. It's like things would happen and like it would just feel stagnant for a little bit, but obviously things are happening inside the story, but it just feels a little bit stagnant. It's very weird to explain, but if you go back and read it, you understand what I'm saying. It's like the story is moving forward, but it doesn't feel like anything's changing until Luffy does something and makes it change. But to be honest, those are the only harsh negatives about the East Blue Saga. Baratie and Arlong Park are some of the best parts in the entire series, and Log Town was perfect setup for the future. The writing in Baratie was phenomenal and has some of the best moments inside the series. I was saying he'll never lose again, and Sanji's conflicts definitely stand out inside that amazing arc. And Arlong Park, well, we got one of the most infamous panels in the entire series. Overall, the East Blue Saga does have its lows, but when it peaks, it definitely peaks. Next up is Return to Sabaody and Fishman Island. Now the negatives here mainly come from the enjoyment section, as many, including myself, didn't feel like the Fishman Island arc was gripping enough in terms of enjoyment, but the writing, yeah, it was definitely great here. From learning about Queen Otohime to then finding out that Jinbei was sort of involved in Arlong Park and finding out why Arlong is the way he is today, this arc gave us a lot of great lore and a lot of great writing moments. The whole racism plotline where it's flipped and the humans were seen harassing the fishmen instead of the fishmen harassing the humans like in Arlong Park. Fishman Island is really well written, but its enjoyment factor did dip it down, and Holdy is a massive player into it. Now don't get it twisted, I'm not saying that Holdy's writing is bad, I'm just saying that as a villain he wasn't enjoyable since his strength was lacking, and a few other things just about his character didn't really entice a lot of people, and myself included. And as we know, a villain does make a massive impact on how you view the arc and just the enjoyment overall. So yeah, since I've covered them both now, why not I see which one is better. This round is gonna go to the East Blue Saga, and it's mainly due to its enjoyment factor. For writing, I'd definitely say they're comparable, but the enjoyment of the East Blue Saga far surpasses the enjoyment of Return to Sabaody and Fishman Island. The peaks we got in the East Blue Saga were way better than the peaks that we got in Fishman Island and Return to Sabaody, so I don't think there is anything too comparable, and I'd even say the lows are comparable as well. So yeah, it is 1-0 to Pre-Timeskip. Next up is Dressrosa and Alabasta, and these arcs don't really have any negatives, but they're still there, so I'm gonna cover them. The Alabasta saga covers everything from the start of the Grand Line to the end of Alabasta, so let's look at the flaws, and well, I don't think there is any major flaws. You could say the pace felt a tiny bit slow, but aside from that, there isn't anything terrible about them. It's just the pacing felt a little bit slow or needed to build up to something. So when we look at the positives, we really have to say what was really bad about this entire saga. Each island we visited gave us insight or just something that we can come back to in the future. For instance, the first arc gave us Laboon and Crocus, and as we know now, Crocus is a Roger pirate. Along with him, we have Laboon, who is also connected to Brook, a future Straw Hat pirate. On top of that, it then gave us a little hint into Baroque works. As you can see, already it gave us something that we could look forward to in the future, and then when you come back at this arc, you're like, okay, Oda did really lay out a lot of things here. Then following up on it, we have Whiskey Peak, and Whiskey Peak gave us Robin and Vivi, who are integral to the story. Later on down the line, Robin does become a Straw Hat and does lay out a lot of lore inside the One Piece verse, and Vivi starts off the Alabasta saga since she is the reason we have to go there and to save her country. Garden showed us the hierarchy of Baroque works with Mr. Free, and they showed us Mr. Zero, and it even gave us Elbaf on top of that. Drum Island introduced Chopper, Blackbeard, Ace and Wapol, while also giving us one of the best concepts inside of One Piece. Concept of your will living on even when you are dead is one of the greatest concepts to touch the series, as it even impacts the series to this day. And then when you add Chopper's storylines in the mix and he finds out that there are other outcasts like him in the world, yeah, Drum Island is extremely underrated in my eyes. And so finally we have Alabasta, and it was great. The country's conflicts, Crocodile's character, Sanji's shenanigans, and how the whole final acts played out. Alabasta was great, and it even gave us people like Bon Clay who will soon come to love. And so as a whole it was great, and this allows me to segue into Dressrosa. Now Dressrosa only has one major flaw, and it is mainly anime based, and I have to say it's the pacing. In the manga the pacing didn't feel as bad, but the anime definitely made it feel even worse. Once you move past it though, there's no doubt that Dressrosa is great. Becca's backstory, Doflamingo invading Dressrosa, Doflamingo's backstory, Lord Corazone's backstory, and then the fight. This arc was stacked, and this is me leaving out Fujitora and everything that happens in the back, so this arc just has a plethora of things that you can talk about. And Dressrosa definitely suffered from the I read it weekly or watched it weekly effects, because a lot of people do that to undermine the arc when the arc is really great. Go back and reread it or watch it and you just see that it's better. I do prefer reading it, since watching it, I'm not gonna lie, even now it does feel a little bit dragged out since they don't animate it properly, but yeah, reading it you'll feel totally different. This arc is definitely an arc you want to read over multiple times, since the themes and everything about it just comes out the more you read it. So yeah, I do recommend everybody rereading it. But putting that aside, let's see which one is better. Is it Dressrosa or is it Alabasta? And the winner is Dressrosa, and it's mainly due to Doflamingo's backstory. Crocodile was compelling, but Doflamingo was just different. I think overall, and especially due to Marineford, I like Crocodile a little bit more as a character than Doflamingo, but inside their own arcs, Doflamingo definitely felt better and more polarizing and more oppressive as a villain than Crocodile did. And because of that, I'm going to place Dressrosa above Alabasta. So this ties them up and makes it 1-1 for each side. And so moving on from those great arcs, we have Gyro and Skypiea versus Punk Hazard. And yes, this will be the only time that I switch two arcs around so they can match up, since Alabasta and Dressrosa happen around near the exact same time in their both respective parts of the series, and it just felt a lot better to match them up. And yeah, they just felt better, to put it like that. But moving on from that, let's talk about the negatives of Gyro and Skypiea. And the only negative here is the pacing. Aside from the pacing, Gyro and Skypiea felt really good, and I wouldn't even say that Gyro had bad pacing. It's mainly Skypiea with the bad pacing. Gyro was great in my eyes, but the slow pace of Skypiea to where it had to build up to the ending, it did feel like it took away a lot of things, especially because of the lore dumps in between. It felt like the arc was very slow paced, but when you read it back, it's like, oh no, I can see it. But when you're first reading it, it's like, yeah, this arc definitely does feel slow. But no, the writing on each arc was definitely phenomenal. So yeah, the positives definitely outweigh the negatives on Gyro and Skypiea. And so when you move into Punk Hazard and then you look at it as a whole, you definitely feel like the enjoyment factor of Punk Hazard wasn't there. Fishman Island and Punk Hazard definitely suffer from the exact same thing, and it's the fact that the villains aren't really that great, but the writing is really good. And the only thing I can say that Punk Hazard did do a little bit better than Fishman Island was it kicking off the Yonko saga. Aside from that, I feel like the writing we got inside of Fishman Island was way better in my eyes. We're not here to compare Punk Hazard against Fishman Island, we're here to compare it against Gyro and Skypiea, so which one is better? And I think it's pretty obvious at this point, it's Gyro and Skypiea. The peaks and the lows of Gyro and Skypiea far outclass the peaks and the lows of Punk Hazard, and I don't even think it's close. And so now that makes the scoreboard 2-1 to Pre-Timeskip. Next up is Lone Ring Longland versus Zou, and I don't think I need to sit here and explain to you guys why Zou is far better than Lone Ring Longland. Lone Ring Longland had like a few cool moments like with Sanji and Zoro teaming up, but can that really compare to all the things that happened inside of Zou? In Zou you had the Wano stuff that was dropped, you then even had the plot twist with Sanji. There's just a lot of things that Zou did that Lone Ring Longland just can't compete with, so yes, this round does go to Zou. And so this makes the score 2-2, making it a draw. Next up we have the two greatest arcs of each section of the story, and that is Water 7 / Annie's Lobby versus Whole Cake Island. Now in my eyes this is going to be extremely complicated as these arcs have no real flaws. And if you have any problems towards Whole Cake, then I'm just going to assume that you read it weekly or you just don't like Sanji. I'm just going to keep it real with you. Both of these arcs were phenomenal from start to finish, so me finding which one is going to be the winner here is going to be a little bit hard. The winner of these two arcs comes down to personal preference. Do you prefer Sanji's conflict and backstory or Robin's? Do you prefer the symbolism of terrible parenting and childhood trauma, or the way they portray genocide and the two extremes of justice? There are many things I can compare with these two arcs as they are very similar but different at the exact same time. Both of these arcs do really well and have great conflicts between the crew and show how Luffy matures. So while writing the scripts, I was forced to take a breather to really find out which one I thought was better, and by the end of my thinking session I was like, I think I know which one's better. Out of these two great arcs, I think that Water 7 / Annie's Lobby is better, and that is mainly due to the fights. Although One Piece is an adventure manga, it is also a battle shonen, and so when you really look at it like that, you're like, okay, yes, Luffy versus Katakuri was great, but you also had many different fights on Annie's Lobby and they were great at that. And so Water 7 and Annie's Lobby does win due to the fights, which does make this 3-2 to Pre-Timeskip. Next up is Thriller Bark versus Wano, and this is going to be a very interesting topic as both arcs are heavily misunderstood and scrutinized for no reason. Don't get me wrong though, they do have flaws, but at what they do, they're great at it. The flaws of these two arcs are different. While Thriller Bark lacks compelling villains, Wano's second act was questionable and the longevity of it does feel a little bit weird. Komori wasn't a great villain and his crew weren't great at all. After receiving CP9 and Baroque Works, I didn't think that Oda would take a step down and get Komori and make him more like Foxy, Kuro, or even Orange Town Buggy. I just didn't think he would do that, but that is what we got inside of Gecko Moria. And so then we transition on to Wano's second act. I do feel like everything aside from Udon inside the second act was just fluff. My other video where I was ranking the post-time skip, I said I didn't know what I wanted out of Wano's longevity, but now I think I have the answer. When it came up to 1040, I feel like everything past that point was just Oda trying to wrap it up quick because he wanted to move on. And then with the Beast Pirates, although I would say that Queen was probably the best written out of all of them, the rest of them just didn't feel as compelling as Kaido or Queen. King is somebody that I want to point the finger at because I feel like this could have been the first time we got on like a real opponent for Zoro. I say real because a lot of them do have really cool gimmicks or whatnot, but I wanted somebody that would challenge him inside of swordsmanship and would actually push him. I'm not saying that King didn't push Zoro, I just wanted King to do more as an antagonist for Zoro. I feel like this should have been the point where it's like you get somebody from a superior race and it's like all they do is say, oh yeah, I'm from a superior race, there's no way I can lose. We've seen that in the story before and Arlong did that way better than King, so I don't understand why people are very satisfied with it. To me, I feel like Sanji got a lot of really good writing when it comes to Queen and everything, and Queen was a great antagonist for Sanji, so I don't know why Zoro couldn't get that exact same help when it came to King. That's one of my more major gripes with the Onigashima raid and just Wano in general, but aside from that, Wano was really great and his peaks were definitely one of the best in the series. Before we talk about Wano's positives, let's talk about Thriller Bark's positives. While Thriller Bark was good because the Straw Hat's chemistry and comedy, Wano excelled at its main antagonist, fights and writing. Brook and Oden have really great backstories, but I think we all know which one is the better out of the two of them. Now don't get me wrong, in Wano there were really great Straw Hat chemistry moments, but I feel like in Thriller Bark it was just there, it just felt natural here. And the comedy is something that I love bringing up about Thriller Bark, since it feels like a very unserious arc where you're just meant to sit there and laugh at it because it does have a lot of funny moments. But then when you look at Wano, it's like Wano does have a lot of great things, and those great things do outweigh the great things inside of Thriller Bark. Having better writing, fights and antagonists, and especially the main antagonist, yeah, it does make me want to lean towards Wano a lot more. And if you watch my post-time skip review video, you would know how I feel about Kaido, and you'll know that I would never ever compare it to Gecko Moria. They're not even in the exact same realm. So while they do excel at different things, I do believe that Wano just excels more. So winning this, we have Wano making this a tie at 3-3. Next up we have Sabaody vs the Reverie, and this is a very fun matchup as they are both small and give us hints into the exact same people who are the Celestial Dragons. Now although in both arcs are pretty much the exact same, the way they are shown and portrayed is going to be a little bit different. In Sabaody they seem like pure evil and they seem like they're on top of the world, while in the Reverie it kind of was like yeah they're on top of the world, but there is somebody on top of them that makes them even more scary. The reason I say they're different is because Emu and the Gorosei are the exact same type of people as the people below, but the difference is that they have actual power while Charlos and all the others don't really have power. So when Luffy is able to punch one and they're forced to send down Kizaru to deal with Luffy, it feels a lot different from them actually just being able to fight themselves and greatly wound somebody like Sabo, and that is why I say they're portrayed differently in each arc. When you sit back and look at these two arcs, you realize that they didn't do anything bad. So what you have to do is find out what they did and see which one did it better. And because of that, it's Sabaody due to the Straw Hat's failure. The moment of Luffy losing is one of the greatest Luffy moments we've had inside the series. In my opinion, I still think it's the greatest Luffy moment. And the reason I believe it's Luffy's greatest moment is because this is the start of his downward spiral. Aside from all the people introduced and even Kuma's subtle foreshadowing, the Straw Hat splitting up and Luffy losing does make me place Sabaody above the Reverie. And I know this is going to sound a little bit mad, but I do prefer the way how Sabaody did approach slavery over how the Reverie did. And so winner of this is Sabaody, making this 4-3 to Pre-Timeskip. And so last but not least, we have the Marineford Saga versus Egghead. Neither of these arcs have any downsides, and the only downside you could say that Egghead has is the Gorosei. But even then, you could say that they played their role really well. In both arcs, the admirals are heavily involved and show us two different sides of their jobs. In both scenarios, somebody needs to be executed, and in both scenarios, they are successful. But how it plays out and how it happens between the two is completely different. So now it forces you to choose as a viewer which one you preferred. Did you prefer the way Ace went out, or did you prefer the way Vegapunk went out? Did you prefer Akainu's absolute justice route, or did you prefer Kizaru's unclear route where he didn't know what to do? Did you prefer the rhyme we got with Ace, Whitebeard and Luffy and even side characters like Crocodile, or did you prefer Kuma's, Vegapunks and Bonnie's? Do you prefer how Marineford set up the future of One Piece and even taught Luffy a lesson, or do you prefer the way how Egghead set up the future of the final saga? Remember, Egghead does include Hachinosu and what happened with Shanks and Kid as well. A lot of these things did happen, and it's like when you look at these two arcs, you really have to sit back and be like, well, which one is better? Now, if Marineford and Egghead were to go bar for bar, I don't know which one I would prefer. That is something that I need to make a whole entire video on itself. But when you look at the whole Marineford saga, where it has Impel Down and Amazon Lily on top of it, yeah, the Marineford saga is better than Egghead. And with Amazon Lily and Impel Down, they don't do anything bad, they only do great things. So when you look at it as a whole, you're like, yeah, the Marineford saga is better than Egghead. So Marineford taking the dub, it does make it 5-3 to Pre-Timeskip, meaning Pre-Timeskip is better than Post-Timeskip. So with that being said, why don't I wrap up the whole video? In conclusion, Pre-Timeskip is better than Post-Timeskip, but this could be down to preference at this point, as I do believe they are very close. And so for right now, I still do believe that Pre-Timeskip is better than Post-Timeskip, but in the near future, I wouldn't be surprised if Post-Timeskip does surpass it. Due to all the setups throughout the story, I do believe that the further we get into Post-Timeskip, the better it will become, because all Oden really needs to do is just execute and deliver on all of his stuff that he's already planned. So that is why I believe that by the end of the story, we're going to be saying that Post-Timeskip is leagues better than Pre-Timeskip. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you was able to stick around to the end, well, I mean, you're here, so you stuck around. So if you guys enjoyed it, please tell me if you guys want me to do some more of this, and like, I don't know, comment something random down below, like comment sticker in the comment section along with whatever you're gonna say if you stuck around to the end. So yeah, I shall see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.